The day my stepmother kicked me out still feels like a wound that never fully healed. It was a cold morning, and the air smelled like rain. I stood on the front porch of the house my father had built with his own hands, our family home. My bags were packed, my heart was heavy, and my stepmother Veronica stood in the doorway, her arms crossed and a cruel smile on her face. She didn't even try to hide how satisfied she was. "It's time you find your own place, Samantha," she said in her smooth, fake sweet voice. "You're old enough to take care of yourself." I wanted to argue, to remind her that this was my father's house, the one he promised would always be mine. But I saw the way she looked at me, like I was a problem she'd finally solved. I realized nothing I said would change her mind. Inside, my father's photos were already gone from the walls. His favorite chair was missing from the living room. Everything that had once made it our home had vanished, replaced with Veronica's expensive taste: white marble floors, silver vases, and fake smiles. I remember clutching the small framed photo of my father that I had rescued from my room. It was the last piece of him I had left. I whispered, "I'll be okay, Dad." But the truth was, I had no idea what I was going to do next. When the door shut behind me, it felt like an ending. The rain started to fall, soaking my hair and my clothes, but I just stood there for a moment, staring at the house. That house held every memory of my childhood: birthdays, late-night talks, the sound of my father's laughter. And now it was all gone. I dragged my suitcases down the driveway, my shoes slipping on the wet pavement. I didn't have a plan. My savings were almost gone because I had quit my job to take care of my dad when he got sick. He had told me not to worry, that he had arranged everything, but clearly, Veronica had made sure those arrangements didn't last. By the time I reached the bus stop, my hands were trembling. I didn't have anywhere to go. None of my relatives wanted to get involved. They all believed Veronica's lies that I was ungrateful and causing trouble. I thought about sleeping in my car, but even that was gone. Veronica had sold it a week after the funeral, saying it was joint property. As the bus pulled up, I took one last look in the direction of my old neighborhood. I promised myself that someday I'd come back, not as the scared, broken girl who got thrown out, but as someone stronger. That night, I checked into a small roadside motel with the little money I had left. The sheets smelled like bleach, and the walls were thin, but it was a roof over my head. I lay awake listening to the rain outside, wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. Still, somewhere deep inside, I felt a spark, small but real. I didn't know it then, but being kicked out wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything that would come next. The motel where I stayed was small, old, and smelled faintly of mold. The carpet was stained, the paint on the walls was peeling, and the heater made strange noises all night. But it was the only place I could afford. I told myself it was temporary, though deep down I wasn't sure how long temporary would last. I spent the first few days making phone calls, trying to reach anyone in my family who might help. My aunt didn't answer. My cousin sent a short message saying she was sorry but couldn't get involved. Everyone had already heard Veronica's side of the story. According to her, I was the spoiled stepdaughter who couldn't handle responsibility, who caused problems after my father's death. She painted herself as the grieving widow doing her best to manage everything. It hurt knowing that people I'd grown up with believed her. I didn't have the energy to defend myself anymore. I had spent so long fighting to take care of my father that by the time he passed, I was drained, emotionally and financially. When I finally went to the lawyer's office to ask about my father's will, the shock nearly knocked the air out of me. The lawyer showed me a copy of a new will, dated just 3 months before Dad died. In it, Veronica was listed as the sole owner of the house, the bank accounts, and the investments. My name wasn't even mentioned. I remembered my father telling me he had secured everything for me, that I wouldn't have to worry. It didn't make sense. The lawyer said there was nothing he could do unless I had proof of forgery or coercion. I didn't have the money to start that kind of legal fight. I walked out of that office feeling smaller than ever. That night, sitting on the edge of the motel bed, I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My eyes were tired, my face pale. I had lost my father, my home, and my dignity all at once. But I knew one thing: I couldn't just give up. The next morning, I started looking for work. I got a job at a small diner downtown, taking orders and wiping tables. The pay wasn't much, but the owner was kind. She gave me leftover food at the end of my shifts, so I wouldn't go hungry. A week later, I found a second job cleaning offices at night. I'd leave the diner by 4 p.m., grab a cup of coffee, and head straight to the office district, working until midnight. Every evening, on my way to work, the bus passed by my old neighborhood. I couldn't help but look at my father's house. The lights were always on, the driveway filled with expensive cars. Once, I saw Veronica laughing outside with a man I'd never seen before, Carl. He looked younger, smug, the kind of man who liked easy money. I felt a wave of anger, but I swallowed it. While she lived in comfort, I scrubbed floors and cleaned trash bins. But every night when I went to sleep, I told myself this wasn't forever. I didn't know how or when, but I was going to find a way to take back what was mine. I wasn't done, not yet. It was close to 10 p.m. when I dragged my cleaning cart into the lobby of the tall glass office building downtown. The halls were quiet except for the soft hum of lights and the squeak of my mop on the floor. My body ached from working at the diner all day, but I kept going. Rent was due soon, and I couldn't afford to slow down. I was cleaning the main hallway when I heard the elevator doors open behind me. I didn't pay much attention. Most people had already gone home by that hour. Then I turned the corner too quickly, and everything happened at once. I bumped into someone carrying a cup of coffee, and the drink splashed straight across his crisp white shirt and dark suit jacket. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I gasped, reaching for paper towels. My hands shook as I tried to help, terrified he'd start yelling. Most people in that building acted like cleaners didn't exist. I braced myself for anger. But instead of shouting, the man laughed, a low, warm sound that caught me off guard. "It's okay," he said, taking the towels from my trembling hand. I should have been watching where I was going. I looked up and saw him properly for the first time. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes that looked tired but gentle. His suit was clearly expensive, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. Everything about him said important, and yet he was helping me clean up the mess. "I really am sorry," I repeated, my voice small. "I didn't see you coming." "It's fine," he said again with a smile. "Looks like we both had a long day." I nodded, embarrassed, avoiding his eyes. My uniform was stained from cleaning supplies, and my hair was messy from rushing between jobs. I must have looked exhausted. I tried to step aside so he could go on his way, but he didn't move. "You work here every night?" he asked. "Most nights," I said quietly. "It's one of my jobs." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's tough. You look like you haven't had a break in a while." I shrugged, not wanting to explain my situation. "Just doing what I have to." He didn't press further. Instead, he smiled again and said, "Well, thanks for the cleanup. I'm Ethan." "Samantha," I replied softly. "Nice to meet you, Samantha," he said, and with that, he walked toward the elevator, still blotting at his shirt with a towel. When the doors closed behind him, I stood there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the shiny floor. There was something about him, his calmness, his kindness, that lingered in my mind. People in that building usually treated me like I was invisible, but he had looked right at me, talked to me like I mattered. That night, when I left work and waited for the bus, I couldn't stop replaying that short moment. It didn't mean anything, I told myself. He was just being polite. But still, something about the way he'd smiled made me feel, for the first time in months, that maybe not everyone in the world was cruel. A week later, I was back in the same building, pushing my cleaning cart down the hallway on the 10th floor. It was late again, close to midnight, and I was the only one left. The vacuum I used every night had finally given up. It sputtered, made a loud pop, and stopped working completely. I unplugged it and sighed, sitting down on the floor beside it. My legs ached, my hands were sore, and all I could think about was how I still had 2 bathrooms left to clean before I could go home. While I was trying to fix the machine, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, I froze. It was the same man from last week, Ethan. He was wearing a casual sweater this time instead of a suit, holding a laptop bag in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. He smiled when he saw me. "We meet again," he said lightly. "You're the only person I've seen in this building as often as I am." I laughed softly, embarrassed. "Yeah, seems like it. My vacuum just quit on me, though. Guess it finally had enough." "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, setting his bag down. I hesitated, then nodded. He knelt beside me, checked the plug, then opened the machine's base. Within minutes, he pulled out a clump of tangled hair and dust that had blocked the motor. "There's your problem," he said, smiling. "You'd be surprised how often it's something simple." I couldn't help but laugh. "You really didn't have to do that." "Hey, I used to fix things for a living," he said. "Before I got into tech, I worked maintenance at a warehouse. Learned a lot from breaking stuff and putting it back together." That surprised me. I had assumed he was born rich, the kind of man who never had to worry about bills or broken vacuum. But he spoke so casually, like it was no big deal. After that, we just started talking. He asked how I ended up working nights. And though I didn't go into detail, I told him a bit about my father passing and how things hadn't gone the way I expected. I didn't mention Veronica by name, but I said someone close to me had taken more than they should have. Ethan didn't interrupt or look sorry for me. He just listened. There was something comforting about that. Someone listening without pity. It had been a long time since anyone had done that. He told me a bit about himself, too. How he'd grown up in a small town, how his parents worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and how he'd built his company from nothing. I could tell he meant it. There was no arrogance in his voice, just quiet pride. When my shift was almost over, he stood up and said, "You know, Samantha, you remind me of myself back then." tired but not broken. You've got grit. I smiled, unsure what to say. He handed me his business card. If you ever want a better opportunity, come see me. I'm serious. Not as a favor, because I think you've got potential. I looked down at the card at the name Ethan Blake printed in bold letters. I didn't fully understand why he'd offered, but something about the sincerity in his voice made me believe it wasn't pity. That night, walking home, I held the card tightly in my hand. For the first time in a long while, I felt a small spark of hope, like maybe life was giving me one more chance to stand up again. A few weeks after that night, I decided to take Ethan's offer. I told myself it couldn't hurt to try. I walked into Blake Innovations nervous and unsure, dressed in my best thrift store outfit. The office was modern, filled with glass walls and soft light. Everyone moved quickly, focused, confident. I felt out of place, but when Ethan saw me, he gave me a reassuring smile that made my nerves settle. He introduced me to his assistant, who showed me around and explained my new role. I started as an administrative assistant, handling schedules, organizing documents, and managing small tasks for the management team. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a fresh start. At first, I was terrified of making mistakes. Every time someone asked me to do something new, I double-checked it twice. But within a few weeks, I started catching on. I learned how to handle reports, manage accounts, and communicate with clients. Ethan would stop by my desk sometimes, asking how things were going. When I told him I was figuring it out, he'd smile and say, "That's all you need to do. Figure it out and keep moving forward." The other employees noticed my dedication. I came in early, stayed late, and never complained. Slowly, they started treating me with respect. I even began to enjoy it, the rhythm of the work, the feeling of being part of something that mattered. Ethan took time to teach me personally. He'd sit down with me during lunch breaks and go over simple finance concepts, explaining things in a way that made sense. He said I had a sharp mind, that I just needed the right guidance. Every word of encouragement from him gave me the motivation I'd lost months ago. After 3 months, I was earning enough to move out of the motel. I found a small but cozy apartment in the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I furnished it with secondhand pieces, painted the walls soft white, and hung up the photo of my dad on the shelf near my bed. For the first time since he passed, I felt like I was building something again. Each payday, I set aside a little money. I started saving, dreaming of finishing the business degree I had put on hold when my father got sick. But no matter how much progress I made, the pain of betrayal still lingered. It always did. One afternoon, while scrolling through a news article online, I saw a photo that froze me. Veronica, smiling at an art auction, standing beside a man I recognized as her new boyfriend, Carl. The article mentioned that she was selling several rare paintings from a private collection. I knew those paintings. They were my father's. His favorite pieces, ones he'd collected over years and promised to keep in the family. Seeing her auction them off for attention and luxury felt like losing him all over again. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the photo of my dad. I whispered, "I'm not done, Dad. I won't let her erase you." I didn't know how I would do it yet, but deep down I made a promise to myself. I would find a way to make things right, no matter how long it took. One Saturday morning, I was cleaning my apartment and decided to sort through a few old boxes I had kept since leaving my father's house. Most of the things inside were small, old notebooks, a few pictures, and some of Dad's favorite books that I had managed to grab before Veronica threw me out. As I flipped through one of them, a folded envelope slipped out and fell onto the floor. My heart stopped when I saw the handwriting. It was my father's. The envelope had my name written on it in his familiar, careful script. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short letter. His words were shaky, like he had written them when he was already sick. He said he had begun to notice changes in the way Veronica handled his affairs, how she often hid documents and insisted he sign papers without explaining them fully. He mentioned he no longer trusted her completely. He wrote that he had given a sealed envelope to his lawyer, containing a statement and documents that would explain everything if anything ever happened to him. My heart raced as I read his final line. "If you're reading this, Sammy, it means I couldn't protect you. But you must protect yourself. Trust your instinct." I sat on the floor, unable to move for a few minutes. It was like my father was speaking directly to me, even after all this time. When I finally gathered myself, I searched the letter for the lawyer's name. It was someone I hadn't spoken to since the will reading, Mr. Grant. I called his office immediately and left a message. The next day, he called me back, his tone cautious but kind. I explained what I had found. There was a pause on the line, and then he sighed. "Samantha," he said, "there was indeed a sealed envelope your father left with. But after his passing, Veronica came here with new documents, a new will and authorization papers signed under his name. She claimed she was executing his last wishes. The original documents were taken by her. My stomach dropped. Are you saying she took the ones my father left for me? Yes, he said quietly. I didn't know they were forged at the time, but things never sat right with me. If what you're saying is true, we might be able to prove she forged those signatures. It felt like a door had finally opened, a small chance to uncover the truth. But as soon as I asked about the process, he explained how complicated it would be. I'd need experts to verify handwriting, witnesses willing to speak, and enough money to start a legal claim. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter again. My father had known. He had tried to warn me. Everything I'd been through wasn't just bad luck. It was a planned betrayal. I felt the familiar ache of anger and sadness, but underneath it, something new stirred. Determination. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small box beside my bed. I didn't have the money or the plan yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Veronica get away with stealing my father's legacy. Not anymore. The day after I found my father's letter, I couldn't focus at work. My hands shook as I typed, and my thoughts kept returning to his words. I wanted to do something, but I didn't know where to start. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by my desk and noticed the worry on my face. You look like something's eating at you, he said softly. Everything okay? I hesitated. I had never told him the full story before, just small pieces. But that day, the weight was too heavy to carry alone. So after work, we sat in his office and I told him everything. About Veronica, about losing the house, about the will that didn't make sense, and finally about the letter I had just found. Ethan listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was silence. Then he leaned forward and said, You realize this could change everything, right? I know, I said quietly, but I don't have the money or the power to fight someone like. She'll crush me before I even begin. He nodded slowly. Then let me help you. I shook my head immediately. Ethan, I can't ask you to do that. You've already done enough for me. He gave a small smile. You're not asking. I'm offering. And we'll do it right. No shortcuts, no dirty tricks. If we're going after her, it's going to be through the law. A few days later, he brought in a legal team from one of the best firms in the city. They met with me in a quiet conference room at the office, asking questions about my father, the will, and every document I remembered seeing. I gave them everything I had, the letter, the old copies, even some photos of my dad's real signature from his journals. Over the next few weeks, they worked quietly but efficiently. Forensic experts examined the signatures on the new will Veronica had filed. They compared them to dozens of authentic documents my father had signed over the years. The results came back clear. The signature on the new will was fake. The witnesses listed were non-existent, and several pages had been replaced. Then came the part that made my stomach turn. Ethan's financial investigator traced my father's life insurance payout. The money had never gone to the account listed in the original will. Instead, it was rerouted into offshore accounts under a shell company connected to Veronica's new boyfriend, Carl. When I saw the report, my chest tightened. Every page was proof of how far they'd gone. It wasn't just greed. It was betrayal planned to the last detail. Ethan stayed beside me as I read through the documents. He didn't say much until I finally looked up, tears stinging my eyes. She stole everything, I whispered. Everything he left for me. He nodded. She did. But now we have proof. And that's what matters. I clenched my fists, my emotions pulling between fury and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to confront Veronica face to face, to make her feel what I had felt. But Ethan placed a steady hand on mine and said quietly, Don't let anger guide you, Samantha. Revenge fades. Justice lasts. Those words stayed with me. I realized he wasn't just helping me win a case. He was helping me find peace. For the first time since losing my father, I felt like maybe I could finally make things right. Filing the lawsuit felt like walking into a storm I had avoided for too long. Ethan's lawyers handled everything carefully, preparing each document, each statement. When the papers were finally submitted, it didn't feel real. After all these months, the truth was finally stepping out of the shadows. At first, Veronica didn't take it seriously. She laughed about it online, calling me bitter and jealous. Some of her friends even joined in, posting comments to mock me. I ignored them. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I knew what was coming, and deep down, I think she didn't. A few weeks later, the court ordered her to appear for the first hearing. I went with Ethan and our attorneys. When she walked in, she looked exactly like I remembered, elegant, proud, and cold. Her confidence filled the room. She smirked when she saw me sitting there, like she still believed I was powerless. But then the evidence started coming out. Page after page of documents, reports, and signatures appeared on the screen. The forensic expert explained how the will was forged, showing side-by-side comparisons. Another investigator showed how the insurance money had been rerouted through fake companies. Each word felt like a stone being lifted off my chest. Veronica's face changed slowly. At first, she tried to hide her reaction, but I saw her hands tighten on the table. When the financial report came up, showing Carl's involvement, she froze completely. The judge ordered her assets frozen until the full investigation could be completed. Her lawyer asked for time to respond, but the judge refused. The next morning, the story hit the news. "Businesswoman accused of forgery and fraud," the headline said. The same people who once called me dramatic now messaged to apologize. But I didn't reply. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for my father, and for myself. A few days later, Carl disappeared. The investigators said he withdrew most of the remaining money and vanished abroad. Veronica was left with nothing but legal trouble and public shame. Her friends stopped answering her calls, and her reputation collapsed overnight. The second court hearing came quickly. When I walked into the courtroom that morning, I didn't feel nervous anymore. Ethan walked beside me, quiet but steady. Veronica was already there, sitting at the defendant's table. She looked tired, her face pale, her once perfect hair now unkempt. When our eyes met, she glared at me, not with power but with fear. It was strange. I used to dream of seeing her fall apart, but standing there, I didn't feel joy. I just felt free. When I took the stand, I spoke calmly. I told the court about my father, about the life he built, and how he always believed truth would rise no matter how deep it was buried. My voice didn't shake. Not once. By the end of the session, the judge commended my composure. Ethan smiled proudly, but I barely noticed. I just kept thinking about how far I had come, from being thrown out of my home to standing tall in the very place she thought I'd never reach. For the first time in years, I walked out of that courtroom with my head high. The past no longer owned me. The final verdict came on a quiet Friday morning. I sat in the courtroom beside Ethan, my hands cold but steady. The judge read through the details slowly, every word echoing across the room. When he finally announced the decision, that the will was forged, that Veronica was guilty of fraud and forgery, it felt like the air itself changed. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I just closed my eyes and let the truth settle in. Veronica sat motionless as the sentence was read. 2 years in prison, restitution for the stolen funds, and all assets returned to my father's estate. Her lawyer tried to appeal, but the judge denied it immediately. The moment the gavel struck, it was over. The lies that once controlled my life were. After the hearing, I walked outside with Ethan. The sky was clear and warm, a strange contrast to the months of tension I had lived through. Reporters gathered near the courthouse asking questions, but I just smiled politely and said, "Justice was served." That was all that mattered. A few weeks later, the legal process of transferring everything back to my name began. The house, the accounts, even my father's old business shares were restored. Walking through the front door of my childhood home again was surreal. The room smelled different, emptier somehow, but I could still feel my father's presence in the wall. Ethan helped me clean and restore the place. We found old photographs, letters, and books that had survived untouched. It felt like reclaiming pieces of my past. I decided I didn't want to live there full time. It held too many memories, but I wanted it to have a purpose. That's when Ethan suggested the idea of a foundation in my father's name. We called it the Hayes Promise Foundation. Its goal was simple: to provide scholarships for young women who had lost their parents or faced financial struggles. The first time we opened applications, hundreds of girls applied. Reading their stories reminded me of my own journey, how close I had come to giving up, and how one act of kindness had changed everything. Ethan and I worked closely to make the foundation strong. He guided me through every business decision, but always let me lead. People admired our partnership, not just for what we built, but for how we treated each other, with respect and trust. Months passed, and I could finally breathe again. I had savings, purpose, and peace. One evening, I visited my father's grave for the first time since all of it began. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and orange. I knelt beside the headstone and placed a single white lily there. "I kept your promise, Dad," I whispered softly. "They tried to take everything you built, but I brought it back. And I'll make sure it helps others, just like you wanted." A gentle wind passed through the trees, and for a moment, I felt like he was there, smiling. I stood up, stronger than I had ever been, and walked away knowing that the chapter was finally closed, not in pain but in peace. That night, when Ethan called to check on me, I smiled and said, "I think he'd be proud." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Standing on the porch of my restored home, I took a deep breath and let the sunlight wash over me. The house looked different now, refreshed, lived in, but still full of the memories that had shaped me. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. I thought about everything that had brought me here. Losing my father, being kicked out by Veronica, struggling through long nights at the diner and cleaning offices, and the months of uncertainty and pain. Each step had been painful, but every challenge had also forced me to grow stronger. I realized that the woman who had tried to destroy me had only pushed me to find the strength I didn't know I had. Ethan came out onto the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He smiled at me, and I returned it. Over time, our bond had grown deeper than I could have imagined. He had been more than a mentor. He had been a steady presence, someone who believed in me when I could barely believe in myself. Together, we had rebuilt not only my life, but also something meaningful to help others through the foundation. I sipped my coffee and let the warmth sink in. I thought about all the girls who were now attending school because of the Hayes Promise Foundation. I thought about the lives we were touching and how far I had come from sleeping in a motel with nothing but 2 suitcases. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining my father's face. I whispered softly, "I kept your promise, Dad. I didn't just survive, I built something that lasts." It wasn't about revenge anymore. Justice had been served, but it had given me something more than satisfaction. It had given me purpose. When I opened my eyes, I looked across the yard at the rose bushes my father had planted years ago. They had grown wild, untamed, but still beautiful. It reminded me of myself, shaken by loss, yet able to bloom in spite of it. The thought came to me, simple but true. Sometimes being forced out of one life leads you into the one meant for you. I had lost everything I thought was mine, but in doing so, I had discovered my own power, my own resilience, and a path I never would have walked otherwise. Ethan nudged my shoulder gently and laughed at something I had said. I laughed back, a full, free laugh that carried all the weight of the past months away. Standing there on the porch, I realized that this home, this life, and this sense of purpose was something no one could ever take from me again. I took a slow, steady breath, feeling the warmth of the sun and the quiet strength inside me. I whispered softly, more to myself than anyone else. Losing everything didn't destroy me. It made me unstoppable. And for the first time in years, I smiled fully. Not because the past had been easy, but because I had survived it, learned from it, and walked forward into a life that was truly mine.